I got out of the car carefully, passing my hand along the back of my gray skirt to make sure that it hadn't wrinkled. I stood, completely steady on the 2-inch heels I wore, and straightened the matching jacket that had made me look the perfect businesswoman, heading off to work. I had made that walk-in from the parking lot thousands of times in the past. Except that the last time I had come to work here, I had been a middle-aged man, not the young girl I now seemed to be. It all started just a few days over 2 years ago, when I called in sick from my job at the university registrar's office, complaining about a bad flu. And it was bad. 2 weeks later I was in the hospital, and for the next 4 months I battled an ailment that completely buffaloed the doctors. Then I passed into a coma, and spent the next year in that. While in coma I received less and less health care. I was not expected to recover, so I lay unconscious on my bed, with an intravenous drip the only thing that was feeding my body. I entered the hospital a 58-year-old man, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and about 60 pounds overweight at 250 pounds. Even before I entered the coma I lost much of my excess weight. Hospital diets tend to do that to you. But while on intravenous, my weight dropped rapidly, one of the reasons the doctors did not expect a recovery. My weight was down to a skeletal 85 pounds at its lowest. I was not alone in my ordeal though. Although I had never married, I had 3 sisters, 5 nieces, and 2 nephews. All the girls were at the hospital regularly. I don't think there was a day one of them wasn't in before I went into the coma. And I understand that not much changed after, although I was less entertaining as a host. Or maybe not. During the last weeks before the coma, I was in such continual, unabated pain that I probably wasn't their favorite uncle or brother. My sister Wendy is a registered nurse, and she was the one who raised hell about the level of care I was getting. She could read the medical charts, and noticed one day that I hadn't been measured for height since falling under the coma. And being weighed was being done spottily. The doctor had requested weekly measurements, and when Wendy noticed that my weight was only being done monthly, and height none at all, she raised Cain. It was after that weighing that I was measured at 85 pounds. But more surprising than the low weight, my height was measured at 5 feet 8 inches, 8 inches less than it should be, and far less than could be explained by my being bedridden. Wendy quizzed the doctors about my height loss, and they finally admitted to her that little was known about the disease, although reports were coming in of similar cases around the nation. They gave her the bad news that all 14 of the cases that occurred before me had been fatal. Another 100 or so had been recognized since I came down with it, and a third of those were dead already. I was currently the longest survivor of the disease, at just over 12 months. No one else had been in the coma stage for longer than 5 months, for me it was 8. And right after that, I started to improve. I was 86 pounds the next week when I was weighed, and 88 the following week. I gained 2 or 3 pounds a week for the next month or so, and soon was over 100 pounds. That was when the nurses noted that I was starting to develop more female than male. Looking back through my records, it was noticed that early in month 9, 3rd month of the coma, my testicles had retracted. There were notations of my penis reducing in size, but this was considered to be normal for a person in a reduced weight state. Wendy had noted months earlier that my nipples seemed larger, and the medical staff said it was merely an illusion caused by the massive loss of body size I had gone through. Apparently they were just guessing, because when I started to gain weight, it became clear that I was developing female breasts. As I gained weight, I gained in that area especially. I was soon estimated as a B cup, then a C and a D. Finally, when my coma ended, I was a full DD. My first bra was a 34 DD. Soon after noticing my breast growth, the doctors ordered regular CAT scans of my abdomen, and in the pictures it was clear that I was developing female genitalia. My testicles had migrated to the position of ovaries, and were somehow transforming into those. A vaginal cavity formed, grew, and did everything but break through. My penis shrank until it was a clitoris, and my urinary tract migrated to a female position. For a few weeks I had 2 urinary openings, and things were messy when fluid started coming out of the new opening instead of into my catheter. Another tube was soon added, and after a few days, the first one, no longer needed apparently, was removed. My hair and beard had completely fallen out early in the disease, even before I went into the coma. Hair started growing, on my head and around my privates at least, during the last 4 months of the coma, at the increased rate of 2 inches per month, 4 times the normal rate. In my groin area it regained normal length and stopped, but in a normal female pattern. It was when my vaginal opening broke through that I first started coming out of the coma, after a full 12 months unconscious. For a week lucidity was intermittent, but finally I was able to talk, although I rambled nonsense quite a bit at first. Wendy told me later that she was astounded when I first spoke, since it was in the high-pitched voice of a little girl. Over time it has lowered in timbre a bit, but it is still high for a female. I am a soprano now, with a much better singing voice than my old tenor was. And if I raise my voice just a bit, and talk with simple words and phrasings, I can fool anyone that they are listening to a 5-year-old girl, a neat party trick. As I came out of the coma, I was still in pain, but not nearly as severe as the last weeks before the coma started. Mostly it was the pain of having been largely immobile for a year, not to mention from all my muscles atrophying completely due to weight loss and inaction. I was told it would take several months of physiotherapy to get me well and pain-free again. At first, no one told me that I had changed sex, not wanting to scare me back into coma, and for a week or 2 I was too disorientated to notice. But you can't go on forever having 2 huge breasts on your chest, and nothing between your legs, and eventually I noticed. "What the hell?" I squeaked out to Wendy when she came in. "It feels like I've got tits. And I can't find my thing. What is happening?" Wendy decided to come clean. "I'm so sorry, John," she said, "but during your coma, you were out for a year, you know, your body has changed. You now are a woman." That floored me. It explained why my voice sounded so different, and why I had been restrained hand and foot for the weeks since I came out of the coma, except for physio sessions, when a therapist or 2 were always holding my arms. I had thought that the huge tent on my chest was some kind of medical device sitting there. I could certainly feel its weight. The restraints had come off the prior night, and I had a very confused exploration of my body with hands that I was still having trouble moving the next morning. "A woman?" I asked dazedly. Then I added, "A year?" "Well," Wendy hesitated a bit. "You are more like a girl than a woman. Your age seems to have dropped under the illness. You really look like a teenager now, well, except for your bust. That is more ample than any teen I know of." "Wow," I said, and Wendy explained for the first time what had progressed. It was 17 months since I had entered the hospital, and after the first 4, which I vaguely remember as a time of increasingly torturous pain, I remembered nothing until a few weeks ago. I had apparently lost an entire year. A black man had been elected US president, the economy had tanked, and I had slept through the whole thing. After that they hooked me up, and I watched CNN for hours, trying to up to date. One thing I noticed in those early days was that my vision had changed. I had worn glasses since I was 7 years old. Once I hit age 50, I started to need bifocals. But now my vision was perfect, better than it had been with glasses. Even more amazing to me was the fact that everything seemed to be more vibrant and colorful now. I learned that I had perfect color vision now, instead of the color recognition deficiency I had as a man. I finally could see the difference between pink and salmon and coral that women had been talking about for years. Physio that day was the first one of me doing anything but lying and having muscles stretched and practiced. A week before they had started having me make movements on my own. They would move a muscle 4 or 5 times, and then make me duplicate the movement. It hurt like hell, but the physios were pleased. They kept commenting that I was proceeding faster than they thought possible. I remember the first day I was going to sit up. At first I hoped that meant I could stand, but they laughed and suggested that might come in a week or two, with actual walking a month or so away, down the road. I just wanted to be able to get to the bathroom myself and get rid of this damned catheter. It was annoying to have something like that stuck into parts you weren't even supposed to have. The physios were both women, one young and in her early 20s named Sarah, the other was Liz, in her later 32nd. They helped me to a sitting position. "Whoa," I said, causing them alarm. They thought I was hurt. "What's the matter? Where is the pain?" Liz asked. "No pain," I responded feebly. "It's these things." I looked down at my ample chest. "They are jiggling and moving around like crazy." They both laughed. "That's right," Liz giggled. "Those are new for you, aren't they? We will have to see about getting you a bra. A big one, by the looks of it." Most women of my size develop their breasts over almost a decade, from pre-puberty to full adulthood. Even those who take the more common surgical route to breasts of this size don't get this big in one swoop. They usually have breasts of some size before undergoing an augmentation. Even the rare woman who is a natural AA or a cup and wants to go to DD size will usually do it in 2 or more passes. But I had been a flat-chested male only a short time ago, in my conscious time anyway, and now I had these huge honkers hanging on my chest. Not that I hated them or anything. Just that morning I discovered that when I played with them, I was able to get a better orgasm than any I had experienced as a male. And I still hadn't been brave enough to explore down below the belt yet. After physio, I was given a bath. I had gotten one 2 weeks ago, but then I was still pretty much out of it, and I don't remember anything about that time. That was the first one I have memories of, and it was quite odd to have the nurse and Wendy cleaning my body. For a minute I was embarrassed at my sister seeing me naked, but after she reminded me that we were both women now, I relaxed. It felt nice, nearly erotic, having someone else touching my breasts as they scrubbed me down. I also got a shampoo, with Wendy cleaning and brushing out my hair, which was now about 10 inches long. She trimmed my bangs high, since they were growing a ½ inch a week, and really needed to be trimmed every other week to keep them out of my eyes. "What color is my hair?" I asked as I watched little locks of cut hair fall onto my bosom. "Blonde, just like Pearl's," she said. Pearl was my niece, Wendy's youngest. "I thought so," I replied. "I need to see a mirror." It suddenly hit me that I hadn't seen what I look like since coming out of the coma. "No problem," she said as she finished the cutting. She went to the side table and picked up a hand mirror. She held it for me, but the angle was wrong, so I reached up and took the mirror. Moving hurt, but I gritted the pain and held the mirror in position. I was amazed. I stared for a long time in the mirror. The girl reflected out at me looked gorgeous, with flawless skin and that bright blonde hair. And so young. I could pass as a teen, I thought. Then I remembered the size of my breasts, and revised that to late teen. I'm beautiful," I said. "Yeah, I'm jealous," Wendy laughed. "But so young." "I'm jealous about that too," she said. "The doctors don't know why, but what you went through over the last 1.5 years seems to have given you youth again. Coming back from the skeletal state you had deteriorated into was like a rebirth, with everything coming in like a child. They say that you have the skin of a baby, and when summer comes you will have to be exceptionally careful about getting out in the sun. Your skin is as new as an infant's, and just as prone to burning. That is one reason you look so young. Every test they make shows you to be a normal woman of 18 or less. Completely normal. You better plan on having a period soon." "A period?" I was aghast. "Oh my. And stay away from boys, men," she added. "Unless you want to be a mother too." "Ugh," I said at the thought of making love to a man. "That is not going to happen." I breezed through physio. I stood up the first time the next day, although I needed help climbing back onto the high hospital bed. I have to admit that wearing a bra was a big help. It didn't end the jiggling, but it controlled it, and just hoped that I would eventually get used to having these huge lumps of flesh hanging from my chest. The following day I was able to both get up and down from the bed, and the next day I was walking. Once that day's physio was over, they took out the catheter. That also meant I could go back onto solid food. Not that I was able to eat that much. My shrunken stomach filled very quickly. Later that day, Annie, once my baby sister, though now I looked young enough that she could be my mother, came into the room and presented me with a book called The Big Book of Baby Names. I looked at it for a minute, and then a thought struck me. Oh God, I'm not pregnant too, I finally gasped. Annie burst out laughing. Good Lord, no, she sputtered. This is for you to pick a new name for yourself. You can't go through life looking like you do, and telling people your name is Jonathan Patrick McFarlane, can you? Oh, I guess not, I said. I really hadn't thought about my name much. The nurses usually called me Honey, Sweetie, or something like that, occasionally Miss McFarlane. But I guess John didn't fit anymore, and there really wasn't much to choose from close to John. Joan and Joanne were out, because the latter is what my next younger sister is named. The story our late mother told was that Joanne would have been my name, had I been a girl. Annie's suggestion of a baby name book made sense, so I thanked her for it, and spent the rest of the evening reading through it, trying to decide what girl names would fit me. I like the idea of having the same initials, because I have a few things with monograms on them that would work just as well for a woman as for a man. It must be the Scotsman, woman, in me that wanted to save a few dollars by not getting rid of my monogrammed bed sheets and bath towels. I finally came up with the name Janella Pamela McFarlane, and all three sisters agreed it worked, and Wendy took the lead in getting me new ID issued in that name. Surprisingly, I was soon Jan or Janella to the nurses. I guess they had also had trouble with my male name. I took a shower the next day, to the amazement of the physios, who noted that I wasn't scheduled to walk for the first time until 2 weeks from then. Things progressed well, and I was released from the hospital only 3 months after coming out of my coma. I was going home, and all the clothes I had were some second-hand clothes of Pearl's that Wendy had brought me to wear home. They included an old skirt and a sweater, along with underwear I had already gotten for the hospital to wear under my gowns. I objected to wearing a skirt in public, but Wendy pointed out that I was 8 inches taller than Pearl, and no pants she had would fit. The skirt was one that Pearl wore in high school and was too big for now, but it was nearly loose on me. Luckily, it had a belt, and I cinched that up and it worked, although Wendy wasn't pleased with the fur. The top was a sweater that had been baggy on Pearl, who wore a B-cup bra, but my huge bust stretched it to the limit. Luckily, I was wearing a pair of flat shoes. Pearl and I both wore size 6 apparently. Wendy even brought in a small purse for me to put my belongings in. They had all fit into my pockets when I came in, but there are no pockets on a skirt. Walking out of the hospital had been interesting. I felt completely naked walking around with my privates open to the wind, or at least it felt that way. I thought I had gotten used to walking without a penis in the hospital, but that was in a long gown. Now, in public, I was missing it all over again. Getting into the car with Wendy, I made my first mistake. Apparently a lady, particularly one wearing a short skirt, does not get into a car 1 foot at a time. When we got home, she made me sit while she got out and came around to open my door. Then she made me put one leg out, then the other before twisting my body around so my legs were together before standing up. Then she went through the routine again, for getting in, and then made me do it all 3 more times before we could go into the house. It had been 19 months since I had been at home, and the place had sat mostly empty since then. Wendy had arranged for cleaners to come in monthly, and said she dropped by every few days to get the mail and check the place after visiting me at the hospital. It turns out that I had been placed on long-term disability from the university, and the checks had kept coming to pay the gas, water, and mortgage. In what turned out to be amazing luck, I had signed up for a 2-year mortgage renewal just prior to my illness, and in a few weeks I would make the last payment, finally owning the house. Being in the hospital, my bank account had actually grown, thanks to Ontario's healthcare programs covering most of my costs, and me not spending any money. That was a good thing, because when I got home I found closets full of my old clothes. As a joke, I put on one of my old suits, and found I was swimming in the thing. For one thing, I was now 5 feet 10 inches tall, I had gained a couple inches back as I recovered, and 120 pounds. That was less than half my old weight. And my waist measurement of 23 inches was about half what my old potbelly had been. My hips were 34, slender for most women, even though they felt huge to me. My bust was 39 inches. Looks like I'm going to need some more clothes, I joked with the huge suit on. Don't worry about that, Wendy replied. Pearl and Amy will be by on the weekend, and they will take you on a clothes shopping spree. Bring your new credit card. Amy was Pearl's younger cousin, and at 20 was the member of the family closest to my new apparent age. The credit card was the new one issued in my new female name of Janelle that I had received only last week. I was still waiting for my passport, revised birth certificate, and driver's license. All 3 of the latter were going to be a problem, because they would say I was born in 1950, and I wasn't going to be able to pass as a 60-year-old. I had a letter now that explained my medical situation, and that I was legally that age. In time I would receive a small printed card that would be signed by the Minister of Health and the Chief of Police for the province to verify my situation if I was pulled over. Technically I would be able to use these to get a senior's discount, wherever one was offered, but I knew I would never want to go through that hassle and potential embarrassment to save a few dollars. It was Thursday, so Wendy took me grocery shopping. Everything in the house was stale and the cleaners had disposed of all the stuff in the fridge and freezer. Wendy drove us to the grocery, and we each picked up a cart. We needed a lot of things to restock the house. I was still a bit more than a little uncomfortable in a skirt, and as we went through the store I got the feeling that everyone was looking at me. I mentioned it to Wendy part way through the trip. She laughed. "They are checking you out," she finally said. "The boys are lusting after you. Especially the younger ones. Your face makes you look like you are in high school, and your body is the kind of things that boys that age fantasize about. I'd worry about any boy in the store who wasn't looking you over. The older men are looking at you and wondering why there were no girls looking like you when they were younger. And the women are looking at you and are jealous of your looks." "Well, I wish they would stop," I said. "Enjoy it while you can," Wendy said wistfully. "Nobody has looked at me like that for over 30 years. Now they all look at me and think I am your mother." The trip to the store ended and the 2 of us were busy all afternoon putting $300 worth of groceries and supplies away. I wanted to continue and bundle up all my male clothes for Goodwill, but Wendy announced that she was worn out after the shopping and packing. I then realized that only one of us was in a teenage body, and even though I still got a twinge of pain now and then, I was in far better shape than my 62-year-old sister. I sent her off home, and did the packing myself. I decided to risk driving the bags over to the Goodwill using my male license, and risk an awkward stop if a cop pulled me over for anything. I did have the paperwork to be legal. It would give me a chance to test out my car. I hadn't driven it for nearly 2 years, although Ben, Wendy's husband, had started it up and driven it around the block every few weeks while I was in the hospital, just to keep the gas from going stale. Inside the car I found myself in a different world. The seat was way too far back, and I felt a half-foot lower in the seat than I had as a man. Most of my lost 6 inches of height was in my torso, with my legs fully as long as they had been. Before I wouldn't have worn a seatbelt for such a short trip, but I didn't want to risk being stopped for that, so I strapped in, surprising myself at how little belt it took to go around my new waist, compared to the old one. And then there was that darn shoulder strap, which landed smack in between my breasts, causing it to look like there were 2 twin torpedoes thrusting out from my sweater. I smiled at the thought, and realized that if I was stopped, I definitely don't want to unbuckle what could be a great advantage for me if the cop was male. At the Goodwill Center, a nice young man came out to help me unload the 7 trash bags full of clothes I had. It was only after I had left that I realized that he had been flirting with me the entire time. He was probably in his mid-20s, and not bad looking, I guessed. As a former male, I was pretty sure that I would be starring in more than one erotic dream over the coming nights for him. It made me chuckle, or giggle, to use the feminine term. Finally back home in the evening, I took off my clothes and had a long bath. Before I got into the water, I looked at my body closer than any time so far in the full-length mirror. I actually was impressed again with what I saw. My breasts were too big, that was a given, but as a former male I was willing to overlook that. I knew it would drive men crazy, but since I was not into men, this wasn't much of a factor. My hips were slim, even though they felt so huge with all the extra padding on the side and rear. My waist was quite tiny, which made my rear look more shapely. My legs seemed incredibly long. For the first time I wondered what I would look like in 4-inch heels. That would make me 6 feet 2 inches, the same height as I had been as a gangly kid of 13. I'd need 6-inch heels to get back to my old height, and I didn't even know if they made them that high. They do, it turns out. My face was perfect, it seemed. My hair was still pretty short, but it was still growing 2 inches a month, and who knows how long that would keep up. It was already long enough that I could get a page boy or some similar shorter girl cut, and it would look nice, although it seemed pointless to get a style done when it was still growing like crazy. I had always loved blondes, and now I was one. My 3 sisters and myself, when younger, had dark brown hair. In my hippie days, I had actually had mine down to my mid-back. All my nieces except Pearl had that same dark brown hair. I was glad that the blonde gene had come to me in this go-round. If it was genetic at all. I certainly didn't look like any of the other women in the family. The only one who had breasts near the size of mine was Wendy, and that was because she was over 100 pounds overweight. A C cup was more normal for the women in the family after they had babies, and B cup before. That got me to wondering if I would gain a cup size with pregnancy. Then I shook my head, remembering what it took to get pregnant, and knowing that I would never let any man do that to me. My face was heart-shaped, I decided, with a really pale complexion. No zits or marks of any kind, and baby smooth to the touch, like all my skin. I was going to have to take care of myself, I thought. Keep those tight abs, no washboard, but still fairly flat with only a hint of a belly. The face was slightly baby-faced, I thought. I really looked like a preteen, above the neck. Below the neck was a different story, as all the boys in the grocery store had proven. I finally got into the tub for my bath. It was the first I had experienced in a woman's body, and it was odd seeing 2 big breasts poking up through the water and no penis down between my legs to wash. I luxuriated in the bath, wishing I had bubble bath, for nearly an hour, and got out of the tub feeling refreshed, but all wrinkly. When I realized that these wrinkles would go away in a few minutes, unlike the ones I had 2 years ago, I had to smile. I crawled into bed nude, the way I always had as a man, and kind of regretted not having any pajamas. Somehow it felt to me that this girl body should have something like that on. I made plans to get some on the planned weekend shopping trip. The next day was a lazy one. Wendy called and said she wasn't going to be coming over, having the flu or something. I told her to stay home and relax. I realized after I hung up the phone that I had worn the poor lady out. Not just yesterday, but over the past year and a half. She had been caring for me pretty much non-stop. She had left her job at the clinic soon after I took ill. Not that she needed the money. Ben worked at the chemical plant in a good-paying job, and all 3 of her kids were out of school now. Ben was going to retire in a few months. But the stress must have gotten to her. I would have to get her flowers or something. I immediately phoned the florist in the small town where she lived, about 15 minutes out of the city, and made an order. I told them not to ring, but just set the plants down inside her back door. I didn't want them to wake her if she was sleeping. After that, I made myself a nice light breakfast, and then turned on the TV. I happened across the shopping channel, and they were selling women's clothes. Some of the outfits looked cute, and I decided to order some. I was really at a loss about sizes, but the lady on the phone was so helpful and told me that anything that didn't fit could be returned. Before I called, I wondered if I would be outed as a crossdresser, before realizing that my voice was as feminine as could be. In fact, it went the other way around when I called. "Hello, I'd like to order item 3R7-1123 in the light blue," I said. "I'm not sure what size I need though." The woman took a second before answering. "How old are you, dear?" she asked. For a moment I thought I would tell her the truth. 60. Instead I said 20. I really wanted to get that pale blue skirt. "Oh my, I'm so sorry," she said, laughing. "You have a very young-sounding voice. I was wondering if I should ask if I could talk to your mother." After that, she was as nice as could be, taking my order and billing it to my credit card. In fact, over the rest of the day I wound up ordering 15 or 20 different things. I phoned in a couple, and then went to the website, where I found way more stuff than was on TV. I ordered tops, skirts, several pairs of pants and jeans, lingerie, a pair of shoes, and some accessories. I was tempted to try some dresses, but couldn't decide on sizing. I was ordering extra small bottoms and large or extra large tops. This only seemed to work on separates. Of course, none of my order came in that week, but I felt more knowledgeable about fashion for the following day's excursion with my nieces. Pearl and Amy were at my door at 9:45 the next morning. They had been regular visitors to me at the hospital, but this was the first time they had been to the house in 2 years. "Wow," Pearl said. "That sweater looks way better on you than it ever did on me." "Yeah, it looks cute." "Aunt Janella," Amy stammered. "Call me Jan or Janella," I suggested. "Aunt is plausible. Some kids have aunts or uncles who are younger than they are, but it does sound weird. Let's just be a bunch of young girls." "Young girls with an adult credit card," Amy joked. "I hope you have a lot of cap space on yours. Mine is all maxed out. If the credit card runs out, there is the debit card, and with my line of credit limit, I doubt we can max that." "We can try," Pearl laughed. "Who's driving?" I asked. "Mom still is feeling tired, so I borrowed her van," Pearl said as we piled out the door. She said I was to thank her for the flowers. "They were quite lovely. She has done so much for me over the past 2 years," I said. "You all have, but her most of all. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You are family," Amy said. "No need for repayment." "Words of wisdom from the baby in the family," Pearl said with a laugh. "I may have been born the last," Amy retorted, "but I think Janelle looks the youngest. I'll bet she would be carded in a bar more often than me." "Well, a little makeup might help that," Pearl said. "We'll find out soon enough." "Makeup?" I said hesitatingly. "I thought this was a shopping trip." "And it is," Pearl said. "And makeup is one of the things we will be shopping for." We chatted for the 5 minutes it took for us to get to the mall, and while we were walking in, I was kind of amazed at how well we were getting along. I was no longer favorite Uncle John, but friend Janelle. They were like older sisters to me, showing me all they knew about fashions and the art of being a woman, things they had spent a life learning that I had to pick up in a few days. The first 2 shops were trendy women's wear stores that catered to the young, and we spent nearly an hour in each, with me trying on dozens of outfits and being told which to buy, and which were too kiddie, skanky or oldish, with the latter pejorative apparently the most deadly. I had to concentrate, because they also told me which outfits were best for work, and which for clubbing. Apparently they considered the latter the more important use for new outfits, and I had to remind them that in a couple of months I would be going back to work, and club clothes wouldn't work well for an assistant registrar at a conservative college. The third stop was a lingerie store. I thought this wasn't needed, but the girls insisted it was. We've seen your bras from the hospital, Amy explained. They are old lady bras. We need to get you something younger and hip here. We only spent a half hour there, and I picked up 5 or 6 bras, more than a dozen new panties, and a lot of hose. I mentioned the need for sleepwear, and the girls tried to get me into lingerie, but I insisted in something comfortable. We found a cute pair of silk pajamas and another flannel pair with slippers sewn into the legs that looked like they would suit me well. At noon we went to a hair salon. Amy announced that we all had appointments. I got you Gustavo, she told me. I heard he was the best in town. Gustavo was a real hunk, thin, but with huge biceps in a very tight black t-shirt. He was also very gay. You should wear your hair longer, darling, he lisped. Well, I am growing it out, I said, without going into details. Good, good. I think we will just trim a bit and make the cut look more feminine, he said. As he cut, he explained about conditioners and other treatments that would help with my hair, which he said was sorely lacking in body. Every woman must have a flaw, he said. If you had perfect hair as well as a perfect body and such a cute young face, it would be a crime. But let it grow, maybe to your waist, and no one will ever notice the lack of volume. Long straight hair is attractive to most men. It is a beautiful color. While he was working on my hair, 2 other girls were there. One did my nails, and the other gave me a pedicure. My fingernails were growing at the same accelerated rate as my hair, so the nails were quite long in spite of having been trimmed short just a week or so ago. As a result, when I was finished I had long red fingernails, as well as newly trimmed toes that were painted the same color. When Amy and Pearl came out of their sessions, they applauded Gustavo's work, to his delight. Pearl had cut her blonde hair several inches shorter, into a page boy cut that just brushed her shoulders. I could barely make out what Amy had done, since her long hair was brown and nearly to her waist. She said she had it thinned out, apparently it gets really thick, and the only way she could wear it so long was to have it thinned. After learning that I could see the difference, I paid the bill for all 3 of us at the salon. Next stop, the makeup stand, Amy declared as we came out. Do we have to? I said. We do, unless you intend to go to work looking like a 12-year-old who's had a boob job, Pearl joked. Makeup can make you look older. Trust me, I'm blonde too, and without makeup I look 5 years younger. I'd get carded more than Amy when we go out. So we spent the next hour at the makeup counter, where I was given a complete makeover by the artist, and wound up buying several hundreds of dollars of product. She complimented me on my super long eyelashes. As a blonde, they are a fairly light tone, and you don't notice them until they have mascara on them, but then they look like false eyelashes. I think that whatever was making my hair and nails grow so fast must have affected them, but they were certainly long. I have to admit that overall the makeup was effective. I no longer looked childish. I looked like I could be on the cover of a magazine. I was gorgeous. Only my average-looking hair kept me from looking as good as the models do, and as Gustavo said, letting it grow out would solve that. Best of all, I now looked like a girl in her 20s instead of one in her early teens. We all ate a quick lunch, ruining my new lipstick of course. So I was invested in the ceremonial girls' right of a group washroom. I have to admit that my first time entering a public women's washroom was a big step for me, but I did it. Inside, Amy redid my lipstick, not trusting me. We all did our business, and then headed back shopping. We had left our bags with a few young guys, and they were still there when we came out 5 or 10 minutes later. We thanked them for looking after the bags, and one of guys got up, being prodded by the other 2, and stood in front of me. He looked about 20, and somewhat nervously asked me if I had any plans for tonight. I was caught completely flat-footed. At first it seemed that Amy was saving my butt by saying that we did have plans. We were planning on going out tonight, she said. Do you guys know any cool clubs in this town? It kinda sucks for clubs around here, one of the sitting boys said. I guess karma is the best. Well, maybe we'll see you there, Pearl said. We should be there around 10-ish. Cool, the boy said, getting a huge grin as we walked away. I can't believe it, Amy said. He asked you for a date. He was kinda cute in a dorky kind of way. I can't believe you told him we were going out tonight, I said. They will be heartbroken when we don't show up. Remember, I've been on that side of the fence. Maybe we will show up, Pearl said. You aren't making us do all this work without giving us a chance to play, are you? I was trapped. I had planned on letting them each buy a new outfit for helping me out, but they were right, it wasn't enough. All right, I said. We will go out tonight. But remember that I'm not into boys. Think of me as your lesbian aunt. I thought you weren't our aunt anymore, Pearl said. And I don't want people calling you my lesbian friend. You know what I mean. Just remember I'm not into guys. We spent the rest of the afternoon shopping, and I got hit on by at least 3 other boys. It was then that Amy got the great idea of getting me an engagement ring. Once we explained to the young clerk in the jewelry store that we needed a fake ring to stop people from pestering me, I swear he wanted to propose on the spot and give me the biggest diamond in the place. Instead, he got me a nice zirconium that fit well, and once I slipped it on, my encounters with the other sex dropped. Not completely, but I found that flashing the ring made over half of them back off. We had to go out to the van after almost every store to unload packages, and by the end of the day, the thing looked full. There was a final visit to the shoe store, where I discovered the mysteries of walking in high heels. I bought 7 pair of shoes, which the girls insisted was the absolute minimum number for a female wardrobe, including heels of 2 and 3.5 inches. I tried on 4-inch heels, but just couldn't manage to walk in them. Pearl admitted that she couldn't wear anything more than 3.5 inches, and blamed it on our size 6 feet. Amy wore a size 9, and scoffed at our excuses. At that point the girls thought we were done, but I insisted on one more trip. We've been to every store in the mall, Amy said. We should head back to your place and unpack everything. No, I insisted. Everything we bought has been for me. I want to treat you girls to one outfit each. I suspect you don't want to go clubbing in those clothes, and you didn't think to bring others. You pick the store and buy an outfit each. No limit. Actually, we did bring other clothes, Pearl said. Clubbing really was a part of the plan. But I did see some really nice things. Me too, Amy said. But this was to be your day. And it has been, I said. But nothing would please me more than to see the two of you getting new things too. Even at a birthday party, a good hostess gets gifts for all those attending. With that, we headed back into the mall, visiting the first 2 stores from the morning, where Amy got an outfit in the first store, and Pearl built up an outfit with a top from the first store, and a skirt and leggings from the second. Both also got a new pair of shoes, actually, boots for Pearl. After a short supper, we were back at the house. We spent the next 2 hours unpacking my things and putting them up. I was glad that I had ditched all my male clothes. There were plenty of hangers and just enough closet space for everything I bought. It was a week later before I had the heart to tally up the damages of the day. It would turn out that we spent nearly $5,000 in 8 hours of shopping. Not all of it had gone on the credit card. After we had spent $2,000 or so, it started to be declined. I later learned that the company assumed the card had been stolen. The rest of the purchases went on my debit card. As well, I had spent over $1,000 with the shopping network the day before. Becoming a woman was expensive, I realized. After spending 2 hours toting boxes, we were all pretty sweaty, and I suggested that maybe we should cancel the clubbing. The girls would have nothing of it. That is how the 3 of us wound up in the shower together. There just wasn't enough time for us to do it singly. I was a little hesitant. After all, 2 years ago these had been my nieces. They still were, I guess, and I hadn't seen them naked since the days when I changed their diapers. But they didn't mind, and I had no qualms about them seeing me nude, so we all wound up in the shower together. Pearl was blonde like me, but the resemblance ended there. She was barely 5 feet tall, and I was near 6. My breasts were DD, while hers were B. My waist was thin, while she was a little chubby. Amy was taller, and had the traditional family dark brown hair. She was a bit heavy too, something that ran in the family. Her breasts were a solid C, so she had nothing to worry about in that department. She was 5 feet 7 inches, a couple inches shorter than me. The result was that in the shower Pearl's eyes were just about level with my breasts, and she seemed to be mesmerized by them. "Pearl really likes your boobies," Janelle, Amy teased, and Paula got kind of red-faced as we stood under the warm streaming spray. "I've never seen anyone with boobs that big," she admitted. "I can't believe that they can be that big, and not sagging at all." "Well, they are brand new," I joked. "Still under warranty. Can I touch them?" I laughed. "We're in a shower, silly," I said. "You can wash them." That started our little session with each of us cleaning one another in a little huddle. But there seemed to be an unwritten rule against washing each other's genital areas that could lead to something more than any of us wanted to deal with. Nevertheless, when we were finished 15 minutes later, we were all more than a little aroused by the experience. "I need a man," Amy announced after we got out of the shower. "Where's your hairdryer, Janelle?" "I don't have a hairdryer," I said. "Until recently I didn't have all that much hair." "But I do," Amy whined, wringing out her long brown hair. "This will take forever to dry." "Mine will dry fairly quickly," Pearl said. "I'll bet Janelle's will too." "We've still got over an hour before we go to the club. Surely yours will be dry by then." "Damp," Amy pouted. "But let's get dressed. One of us is going to have to do Janelle's makeup for her. She won't be able to do it herself without practice." So we spent the next hour getting dressed. I guess I took the most time, since so many of the things we put on were new to me, and Pearl helped me with them. It was my first time putting on pantyhose, for example. I had been wearing a bra for several weeks now, but those were the mom bras that Wendy had bought me for the hospital. The pale blue lacy number that the girls had picked out for me at the lingerie store was strapless, and I felt like I was going to pop out of it at any time. It did feel a little more secure once I put on the clothes the girls had found for me. As I had mentioned before, dresses were seldom available off the rack for this figure, but Amy and Pearl had come up with a winner ensemble for me. It started with a black peasant girl top of silk, with no shoulders, but puffy sleeves that were only attached to the torso by a little bit of fabric. Over this was a corset of black velvet and red lace trim that accentuated my small waist, and had a shelf thing at the top that my boobs rested on, holding them up and making them look even bigger than before. My skirt was a flouncy thing that stuck out more than a foot from either side, and really wasn't all that long. My black hose covered my legs, which looked even longer than normal, and I wore red Mary Jane shoes, since I wasn't willing to try heels so soon. "God, I am so jealous," Pearl said when she finished with me. "You are so gorgeous. All we have to do is make that baby face match the hooker bod and we'll be laughing." So, like a good tag team, she switched me off with Amy, who had been dressing herself in the new outfit she had bought, and had finished her own makeup. We then went to work with me at the makeup table that they had set up in my bedroom on my old computer table while Pearl got dressed. When she was finished, I could tell that the look was different somehow from the one I had gotten at the mall earlier. She said it was a little more extreme for the club, while the earlier one had been more for work or day use. My eyeshadow was darker, and she had used mascara to make my long eyelashes pop and look even longer. My complexion was smooth enough that only a little powder was needed, as well as full red lipstick to accent my red fingernails. For the last part of the makeup session, I had to share the mirror and the gear with Pearl, who had finished dressing in record time, and was doing her makeup as Amy finished me up. Amy's hair was dry finally, and after brushing it out, a major task with such long hair, we were ready to go. It was nearly 10, and we all piled into my car, as going to a club in a van would be considered dorkish, or so Amy insisted. She drove, and along the way argued with Pearl over who was to drive home. I offered, but they insisted that one of them would be the designated driver. Pearl finally seemed to win, which meant Amy would be limited to one drink for the night. We got to the club, one of several in the small university city I live in, and parked a couple blocks from the club. I was glad not to be in heels as we walked down the street. Pearl had borrowed my new 3.5-inch heels to give her a bit more height, but she was experienced walking in heels. I can't think of any time when she hasn't worn at least a 2-inch heel. A short girl thing, I decided. Oh look, there is a lineup, Amy noted as we got close. There were several dozen people lined up outside the club. Let's look and see if the boys are in the line, Pearl said. We'll be able to get cuts if they are. We walked along the line nearly to the door, but the boys weren't there. Either they are already inside, or we've been stood up, Amy said. I noticed the burly biker-looking fellow at the door nod at us, and grabbed the velvet rope. Look, Pearl said. He's going to let us in. Why would he do that? I asked as we went past him into the club. Because one of us is drop-dead gorgeous, Pearl said. They want the hot girls in their club, and baby, there aren't any hotter than you in this town. I got kinda red at that remark, but said nothing. Not that much could be said. The noise in the club was deafening. We worked our way around, and as we did, Amy noticed one of the boys waving from the other side of the club. We cut across the dance floor, it wasn't all that busy, in spite of the lineup outside, and sat down at the table. Just as we did, there was a lull in the din as the DJ took a break. Hi guys, Amy said as she confidently sat down. There were 3 chairs saved at the small table. Been here long? A couple hours, one of the boys said. I hope you didn't have to wait in line long. I should have told you about that. No line for us, Pearl said. We have the goddess with us. I'm Bill, the boy said. This is Carl and Steve. As Amy introduced us, I looked over the boys. Steve was the tall, nerdy-looking one who had asked me out at the mall. He was about 6 feet 4 inches and pretty thin, with short brown hair and some acne scars on his face. Bill was short, at about 5 feet 6 inches, and slightly chubby, and he was clearly aiming at Pearl, since both Amy and I were taller than him. Carl was about the same height as me at 5 feet 10 inches and really was the best looking of the 3. He had a muscular physique and a pretty handsome face, with light brown hair. Amy sat down next to him, staking her territory, although something told me she would back off if I moved in on Carl. I really didn't care. I wasn't into men, I kept telling myself, and these were really just boys anyway. I knew it would be the thrill of his lifetime for nerdy Steve to be seen with a woman as attractive as I now was, so I decided to pay attention to him. Do you go to the university? He asked me. I'm in 4th year engineering there. You look like an engineer, I laughed. I work at the university. Although I'm on medical leave right now. Nothing serious, I hope? I'm getting better, I said. What department do you work in? Registrar. I don't think I've seen you there, he said. No? Well, I've been off a while, and worked in the back before that. I think I should be going back in a couple months. Maybe. I'll see you there then. Maybe. At that point the conversation stopped as the DJ came back and ramped up the music. We tried to talk, but it was more like shouting, and eventually I recognized Steve was shouting the word dance. I nodded, and we got up to the dance floor. We danced for about an hour, when suddenly the DJ stopped the heavy rock and started playing a slow, close dance tune. I glanced at the DJ stand, and saw Amy there with a big smile on her face. I had a feeling she had bribed the DJ to play slower music. Even though I had only had one drink, it had buzzed me pretty well. I was now in a body half the weight of my old one, and even then I hadn't been much for drinking over the last 20+ years. So I was game to do a slow dance with Steve, whose face lit up when I stepped up close to him, actually brushing my breasts against his chest. Damn, I thought, those things stick out more than I expect. Particularly in this corset. It was odd to slow dance. I hadn't danced as a man for years, other than with my 2 older nieces at their weddings. And this was the first time ever where I hadn't led. It also felt odd to be beside someone so much taller than me. I was used to being 6 feet 4 inches and the tallest person around. At 5 feet 10 inches I was still tall, but Steve was a half foot taller. And while he wasn't muscular, he had big hands that just swallowed up my new tiny hands. He was a good dancer too, with one hand on the small of my back, guiding me expertly around the dance floor. I noticed that many of the couples had left the dance floor for the slow dance, and most of the eyes in the crowd were on us. I wondered if we made a nice couple. After the dance ended, the DJ announced another break. I missed that though, for Steve ended the song by kissing me. It was the first time I have ever had a man's tongue in my mouth, and you know, it wasn't all that bad. I certainly didn't pull away, at any rate. Sorry, he said. I should have asked first. But it seemed such a perfect moment. And you are the most beautiful girl I have ever known. I just had to try. I'll understand if you are mad. No, I purred. You do that as well as you dance. Thank you for both. On the way back to our table, we passed a group of guys, clearly jocks, wearing team sweaters from the college. Hey baby, want to dance with a real man? One of the jocks called out. He actually was quite handsome, and probably expected me to come over. Instead I replied, I've got one already. Did you see any more around? That pissed the jock off a bit. I'm twice the man as that nerd. What say we both go outside and the better man can come back in? God, I said as scornfully as possible. You must be dumber than you look if you think he is going to leave me to go outside and play silly games with you. Why don't you and your little friends go somewhere else and leave the grown-ups alone? I took Steve's arm, put it around my waist, and let him lead us back to our table, while the jocks started razzying their mate for the put-down. With that we headed back to the table where the other 4 were waiting. Amy immediately said that she needed to go to the washroom, and Pearl immediately got up as well. I forgot the rule, but Amy grabbed my arm and dragged me off as well. Oh my God, Amy said once we were inside. You totally kissed him. I thought you weren't into guys. I'm still not into guys, I said, defending myself. And if you noticed, it was him that kissed me, not the other way around. Oh yeah, Pearl said. I must have missed the part where you slapped him for trying, and spit out his tongue. Girl, you looked totally into it. Yeah, I guess I was, I finally admitted. When he did it I was surprised, but I decided to go along with it. I think Steve is kind of fragile, and I didn't want to spoil the moment for him. Plus, he's a pretty good kisser. I can safely say that he is the best man I've ever kissed. Amy broke out laughing immediately, but blonde Pearl didn't get it for about a half minute, then blurted out, he's the only guy you've ever kissed. Then she joined in the laughter. Come on, Amy said. For one thing, most of your lipstick is on Steve now, so we need to touch you up. And then it will be your turn to sit. I want to dance with Bill and Pearl wants to dance with Carl. Maybe we will get lucky enough to earn a kiss. It will be your turn to sit with our purses. We all had a good time, and I got pretty drunk just sitting with Steve, even though he was a pretty fair conversationalist. He was amazed to learn that I was into science fiction, and was blown away by my knowledge of the books from the 60s to 80s, before he was born. We had a long discussion about The Lord of the Rings. He was a big fan of the movie, while I have read the books nearly a dozen times over the years. I didn't tell him that. He was an engineer, and could quickly figure out that if it took 3 months to read that series every couple years, the way I like to savor it, then reading it 12 times would take over 24 years. He didn't even think I was that old. It was early in the morning when we finished up, and I'll admit that I had to lean on Steve's arm when we left. I had partaken of more than a few drinks, and was that tipsy. The boys offered to walk us to our car, and it may have been a good thing they did, because we ran into that same group of jocks outside the bar. The one I had insulted was itching for a fight, and challenged Steve. Before I knew it, the two of them were faced off, and I knew that the jock would cream him. Sober, I might have come up with a better solution, but when the jock circled around Steve and was right in front of me, I lurched forward and grabbed his earlobe. "Listen, mister," I slurred. "You got no reason to fight with Steve here. He didn't do nothing to you, and you should just leave him alone. Fight me if you want to fight someone. I've taken young bucks like you afore." All this time I had most of my weight hanging off his ear as I tottered around, and it was clearly starting to hurt him. He finally shoved me away, right at Steve, luckily. "Here, take her," he said as he rubbed his earlobe. "She's crazy. I wouldn't date someone like her. You keep her for all I care." With that he melded back into his pack of jocks, and they moved away. Meanwhile, I was spinning out of control. Steve had caught me and stopped me from falling, and then we sort of toppled over together. He was holding me when I said, "Kiss me, you fool." Seriously. I don't remember that part, but Amy told me about it later, and she was the sober one. The boys left us at the car, and Amy drove us home. She said she was pretty sure that the boys followed us. When we got home it was about 2:30. I immediately went to the bathroom and started to throw up, while Pearl just crawled into my bed and passed out. Amy looked after me, and cleaned me up, and then packed me into the same bed. So yes, I did sleep with my niece that night, although nothing happened. Amy slept on the couch. She later said the bed looked crowded with blondes, big and little, and she was afraid of being puked on. Pearl was actually within her limits, and woke up pretty sober. I woke up expecting a massive hangover, but found that I was in pretty good shape. The joys of a young body, I guess. Anyway, I was able to make breakfast for the girls before they headed home. The girls asked me to head out to the clubs again with them, but I turned them down. It wasn't my last shopping spree though. You would think that $5,500 worth of clothes would make a wardrobe, but apparently it didn't. The next weekend I went shopping with Wendy and Pearl, and the following one I went with Wendy alone. Then there was a weekend trip with Annie and Amy, and Amy's older sister Belle. Finally my last sister Joanne, and her daughters Tammy and Roberta took me out. We were a little saner each of these times, and only spent about $1,000 per trip. My closet was getting full, which was a good thing, since I got notice that I would be heading back to work in a little over a month. The doctors had decided that my long-term disability was over. This was in early July. And even though I wouldn't go clubbing with the girls, I did agree to go to the beach one weekend with them. My doctors said it would be good for me to get limited sun, to help toughen up my new skin a bit. I was warned to wear a hat with a brim, and to make sure I had suntan lotion with the highest protection factor applied at least hourly. I was to be in the sun no more than 3 hours. With 3 universities within 2 hours drive, and 2 community colleges, Asaga Beach was a popular spot for young people, and I agreed to go there. Of course I had no bathing suit, so Amy and Pearl took me shopping for one. I wound up with a bikini that I didn't think would actually be legal. It barely covered anything, top or bottom. I was outraged to learn that it would cost $150 for such a little pieces of material. I mean, I could literally stuff it into a small drink glass. Don't ask how I learned that. The high price made me feel less uncomfortable about the fact that Amy switched parts from 2 different swimsuits, getting me a size 0 bottom and a size 14 top to accommodate my ample breasts. I mean, how is the store going to sell the remaining size 14 bottom with a size 0 top? A woman like that would be way rarer than one built like me. Amy shrugged off my complaints, saying that everyone did it, and it was the suit maker's fault for not making sizes for everyone. We went to the beach later that day. I packed a big bag, because along with towels and other beach necessities, I had 3 bottles of lotion, my big floppy hat, a pair of jeans and flat shoes, a sweatshirt, and underwear, in case we needed to change, as well as a cover-up to wear once my 3 hours were up. I knew those girls, and if they met men, which I assumed would happen, then they wouldn't come home after 3 hours. I had my new license by then, so I drove, and promised to be the designated driver if we did any drinking. I wanted to stay sober after my last embarrassing outing. We made it to the beach just after noon, and parked the car a couple blocks from the beach. On the beach we attracted a lot of attention. Chubby Pearl wore a blue one-piece suit that really pulled her tummy in, and made her look thinner than she is. With her short height, and no heels for once, she was super petite, and a lot of guys are into that. And Amy wore a bikini like me, and while her breasts were way smaller than mine, she looked pretty hot in it. She admitted with a smile that it was an inflatable top, giving her another full cup size. She sucked in her stomach most of the time in what was a remarkable feat of breathing, and you wouldn't notice that she was a little overweight. Together we made a pretty hot trio. It didn't take long before guys were hitting on us. I was all for saying no, and staying stag, but Amy and Pearl have this kind of ESP thing where they know the tastes of the other and guys almost instinctively. So after we turned down about 5 or 6 offers of accompaniment, Amy agreed to the offer of 3 guys who wanted to buy us ice cream. Actually, I was the only one who got an actual ice cream, with both Amy and Paula getting diet frozen yogurt in a cone. Waiting for our cones gave me a chance to look at the boys. These 3 were a definite cut above from the guys from the club. Fred was the alpha male of the trio, and made it clear that he wanted to hook up with me. He was gorgeous, and admitted to doing some modeling for the Sears catalog. He wore a Speedo that was either padded, or showed that he was very well equipped in an area I had no interest in. He had an athlete's body too, not surprising because all 3 were on the varsity football team at Southern, one of the other universities in the area. John was a receiver, and he seemed to have picked up Amy. She wasn't complaining. He was as tall as Fred at about 6 feet 3 inches, and was just about as muscular. And while he wasn't model perfect like Fred, he was rather cute, from my inexperienced point of view, anyway. And he must have had more padding in his Speedo, because he was even bigger down there. Both of them were way bigger than I had ever been back when I wore that kind of equipment. Dale was a tackle, and he was a bit heavy, with a waist that hung over his swimsuit belt a bit, unlike the 6-pack abs of the other 2. And while he was only 5 feet 9 inches tall, he was about as wide as a truck, and had muscle on muscle. Pearl was not unhappy at all that he sat next to him at the ice cream place. After our snack, the boys walked us down to the beach. I had my cover-up on since we came from the car. Amy had told me I should take it off right away, and advertise the product as she put it, but I wanted to maximize me sun exposure time, so I refused. When we got to the beach, Fred had been a gentleman and carried the bag, and we staked out our spot with towels. I took off the cover-up, and witnessed the hilarious sight of the 3 men's jaws dropping as they stared at my suit. Well, I guess they were staring more at what wasn't my suit, but I prefer to think it was that way around. Then, looking around, I noticed quite a few other male faces looking my way, many surreptitiously hoping their girlfriend or spouse wasn't noticing. "My God, Janella," Fred said once he got his voice back. "You are gorgeous. You look like some of the models I've worked with." "No, I'll correct that. You look better than any of the models I've worked with, and you aren't stuck up at all. You're so friendly and easy to talk to." "Well, you are easy to talk to as well," I said. "And you are a looker yourself. But maybe those other girls have more experience at being beautiful than I have. This is kind of recent for me." As soon as I said that, I realized I had goofed. I was not going to go into my life story with this boy. Not to mention that he would run at top speed if he knew I had been a middle-aged man 2 years ago. And Amy and Pearl would never forgive me. They seemed quite pleased with the boys that were chatting with them. "Wow," Fred said. They look great. Totally natural. I was confused for a second, and then realized that he thought I meant I had gotten a boob job. I laughed and at the same time thought I saw how to correct my faux pas. No, these are completely natural, I said. It's just that I've lost a lot of weight since last winter. It was the truth, and a good explanation on why I wasn't used to being seen as a hot babe. Well, you really look great now, Fred said. You would never know. Was it a lot of weight? Over 100 pounds. I got sick, and now this is what I look like. A lot of people would like to get that kind of sick, Fred said with a smile. Well, not really, I said. The being sick part was not any fun, and I could have died. But I'm 100% okay now. The only thing is, I have to be real careful about being out in the sun. Maybe you would be a gentleman and put lotion on my back. Do I get to do the front too? He joked. I gave him a look that I later realized was that typical girl look of disgust at a bad joke. Just kidding, he said quickly, and he took one bottle from me to apply to my back as I did my frontal areas. Your skin is so soft, he said as he applied the lotion. I can't believe it. Thanks, I said. I noticed he was very polite when he applied the lotion to the hips and back of my legs. Luckily, I was able to reach those areas myself and make sure I got good coverage. I could do that all day, he said. Maybe you want to do me now? Is there enough lotion? Oh, I brought lots, I said, applying it to his back. I noticed that he didn't apply any himself, so I came around and applied it to his arms and chest as well. You are the opposite of soft, I said. You must work out a lot to be so muscular. I spend a couple hours a day in the gym, he admitted. How much can you lift? I can do almost 400 pounds, he said. Clean and jerk, or snatch? I asked. He looked at me oddly. How do you know the difference? Snatch. I can jerk about 350. I was nearly caught again. I had forgotten that women weren't as into sports as men. I don't know, I said. I guess I remember it from the Olympics. You watch the weightlifting on the Olympics? I saw a bit of it, I admitted. Well, I'm impressed, he said. Shortly after that, he disappeared for a while without telling me where he was going, and I sat and occupied myself at people watching, since both Amy and Pearl were busy chatting with their dates. Then Fred comes back, lugging a big beach umbrella. You rented that for me? I accused. I tried, but they don't rent them, he said. I'm the proud owner of a new beach umbrella. Well, thank you, I said. I truly was impressed that he had spent that kind of money to make me comfortable. Sitting in the shade would mean I could spend a couple more hours at the beach. When I told him that, he said, then it is money well spent. After a few more minutes chatting, the boys noticed 5 other couples playing some weird kind of water polo. I had never heard of the beach sport, but soon realized that it had the boys standing in the water, and their dates on their shoulders. The girls would throw a small ball about 5 inches across to one another, in attempts to score on some floating platforms anchored at different points in the water. The 6 of us walked over and spent a few minutes as an audience, before the group invited us to join in. Actually, the guys were having trouble concentrating on the game, with each one staring at me. And I noticed that the girls were staring at Fred and John as well. So they decided to invite us into the game. What are the teams? John asked. I don't know, one of the fellows said. It can be bikinis versus one-pieces, his date said. She had noted that with her group there were only 2 girls in bikinis, her being one, with the other 3 in one-piece suits. With that, Amy and John and Fred and I joined her team, while Paula and Dale joined the other 3. I wondered how I was going to get way up onto Fred's back when he moved around behind me and put his hands on my waist and lifted me completely out of the water. I wasn't expecting that, and screamed a short cry, but then was plopped down on his shoulders. It felt odd to be so small that a man could lift me so easily. Until he picked me up, I felt quite normal-sized. I mean, he was less than a half-foot taller than me. But I guess he weighed close to double what I now did, and had muscles that I had never had. Now I had never been in such a position as a man, and to tell you the truth, it would have been quite painful on the male equipment with the bouncing around we did up there, but the game was a lot of fun. Our side clobbered them. All 4 of the guys in our group were pretty athletic and terribly competitive as jocks. I was pretty good at the game, and scored about half of the goals for our team. My male experiences in sport must have helped me, but I still had some off shots and passes that went more sideways than the way I wanted them to go. Having hands so much smaller than I was used to made the game harder. Amy got a couple goals. Pearl was pathetic. She was clumsy and awkward. Finally, Dale and her moved back to defense, where they did better, since Dale was fearless in diving to stop a ball, which resulted in Pearl getting dunked several times. But she was a good sport about it, and we had a good time until I forced an end after about an hour. That meant it had been 75 minutes since my last lotion application, and I really needed to get a new one. The boys, except for Dale, were happy as the winning side. I didn't even realize they were keeping score until Fred announced that we had won 42-29. Jocks keep score of everything, I guess. Back on the beach, Fred happily reapplied lotion to me, and all 3 of us girls sat under the umbrella for a while as we dried off. We spent an hour on the beach, with Amy, Pearl and the boys sunbathing, and me under the umbrella. After that, we went back into the water again. The water polo players were gone, and the boys had races. They challenged us to race with them, offering us head starts. Neither Paula or I were swimmers, so we declined, but Amy took them up on it. She was a pretty good swimmer, and had been on a team in college, so she easily beat them with the head start. Then they made her race them even up, and John and Fred barely beat her then, but was able to assuage their male pride. Dale must have known she would beat him, so he didn't race that heat. Then it was time to go back and lotion me up again. We followed that with a walk down the beach, after loaning our umbrella to a couple with a baby, in return for her watching our stuff. As we walked, Fred put his arm around me, and I felt more like a girl than I had in the last 5 months. He was so big and strong, and I felt so tiny and protected with him. I finally realized that the closest thing in my experience to that would be when I was a little kid, and my dad used to walk with me with his big hand around my tiny one. When we got back, the couple with the baby were still there, and so was all our stuff. We thanked them and packed up. We came to the boys' car, Dale's, before we got to ours, and Fred stashed the big umbrella he was hauling, along with my big bag, heavier now because of wet towels. Along the way the boys invited us for dinner at a burger stand, and Amy quickly accepted. She was clearly smitten with John, and I wondered how we were going to get her home that night. I wondered even more when we would up getting drinks on a patio bar after the burgers. There was music, and I danced a couple dances with Fred, wanting to compare with my experiences with Steve 3 weeks earlier. And when we finally left, I even kissed him. Again, I wanted to compare. Fred was a far better dancer than Steve, but not nearly as good a kisser. And Pearl and I drove home alone. Amy had headed off with the boys, intending to spend the night at John's apartment. There had been a bit of a scene in the woman's washroom when she told me. "Don't go all auntie on me, Janelle," she said tartly. She was more than a little drunk, and I was still quite sober as the designated driver. I hadn't had even one drink, knowing how much one affected me. "Are you sure it is a good idea?" I asked. "I'm nearly 23, she retorted, "and I haven't been a virgin for 8 years now. I normally don't sleep with guys on the first date, but I really like John and he really likes me." "Well, okay," I said. "I used to be your uncle, but I guess I have to let that go. We are just friends now, and I will admit that you probably know more about this dating stuff than I do. Just keep yourself safe, and call us on your cell if you need a ride. John will bring me home tomorrow," she said. Then, when we went back to the table, I embarrassed the heck out of her by making all 3 guys show their driver's licenses to prove that they were who they said they were, and writing down addresses. Amy was spitting mad at me for doing it, but I wanted to make sure she was safe, and I knew where she was, and that the guys knew I knew where they lived. Fred actually backed me up, telling Amy that I was being smart. Of course, then he wanted to see my license, which I refused. I also wouldn't give him a phone number. Not that it did any good. I got a call from him 2 days later. Amy had given my number to John, who passed it to Fred. I had to explain that while I had a great time with him, my life was such that I didn't want any serious relationship for the next year. He seemed heartbroken and promised to call me in a year. It was at this time when the first survivor of the disease went public, down in the US. I was really the first, but had refused to allow my identity to be released. The TV networks had been playing up the disease pretty much over the past few months, and there were about 1,000 people a month coming down with it. For the media, that was enough to declare it a pandemic. After the doctors had seen how I was changed by it, they tried treating sufferers with massive female hormone dosages. That seemed to do the trick for many, and soon about 1 in 6 was surviving. The first guy, now a girl, who went public was from Texas, and she was on the news all the time for a few days, appearing on all the networks and such. I don't think she was as pretty as me. She had been a shorter man, and lost the same 4 inches of height I did, to wind up at 5 feet 3 inches. She was busty, probably AD, and had light brown hair. She was thin, although not as thin-waisted as me, and with a bigger butt. Still pretty shapely, and a definite looker though. Funny thing was, on many of the shows she was accompanied by the fat, frumpy older woman, who looked like her mother or grandmother, but was actually her wife. And they were from a state that had passed a resolution that marriage was only allowed between a man and a woman. I wondered how that would turn out. Within a few weeks there were another dozen or so survivors on TV, and it became almost old news. I can't understand why anyone would want to go through the media ringer like that, but I guess that is a cultural difference between Canadians and Americans. Although there had been a Canadian who went public too. While this was all happening, plans were underway for me to return to work. The first bad news was that when I got sick, one of my underlings was given my job temporarily, and when I went into the coma I was not expected to survive, so he was given the associate registrar position permanently. They also had no intentions of moving him out. I was still going to be paid the same money, just over $75,000 a year, but they would be assigning me other duties. And since I was coming back just as fall term was getting ready, that would probably involve me working the front counter for a while. This was an entry position, normally filled by someone paid a half to a third what I was getting. But I looked at it as an opportunity. As a senior person, I would be able to come up with ways that we could use to make the job more efficient and effective. I said I was willing to try. And it was only for a month, while they tried to figure out where I could work most effectively. And that leads us up till today, with me getting daintily out of my car and making the long walk to the admin building, several hundred yards into the campus. As I walked in I saw Mick Sloan, one of my old friends from the math department. We had worked together on a revitalization of the math program. "Hi, Professor Sloan," I said cheerfully as he walked by. "Hello," he said, stopping and looking at me, trying to remember who I was. He must have decided student because he said, "You do know this is a staff lot, don't you, miss?" I smiled, expecting this to be fun. "Well, yes, I am staff. Don't you remember me? We worked together 5 years ago on the Math Revite project." "Oh, yes," he lied. "You were the secretary, weren't you? Have you dyed your hair?" "No, although you are right about my hair color changing. I was the registrar's rep on the committee." "No, that would be John McAfee," he said, then stopped. "Oh my God. Is that you, John?" "Janelle now," I said. "Legal and everything." He just stared as he looked me up and down. Well, you certainly turned out well, I have to admit. There was a big meeting about you last week. Not everyone in favor, you know. I wonder if they'll change their mind when they see you. I think some of them thought that it was going to be the old John coming to work in a dress. We walked in, chatting. What do you mean, not in favor? Well, you know how some of them are around here. Pretty conservative. Remember when Garnet Swenson wanted the same-sex marriage benefits? Same lot that were complaining about you. Well, it's not like this is a lifestyle choice for me, I sputtered. I mean, I didn't choose this. It was an illness, for Christ's sake. Yeah, but Garnet said his being gay wasn't a lifestyle choice either. Didn't work for him. I hope it works better for you. They're pretty much against anything that doesn't follow the Bible. Especially the parts that back them up. Well, I'm sure the Bible doesn't say anything about what happened to me. Hell, their God did this to me, I fumed. Calm down, John. No, what was it? Janelle, he said. They were a minority. I just wanted to let you know. Most will be on your side. Does everyone know? Not students, I said. And only some of the senior staff. Were all the faculty at the meeting? Hard to say, he said. A lot of faculty won't come to a meeting unless it is mandatory, and even then some won't show and say that they were there. But it seemed to only be the faculty from before you left. The ones who would have known you, I guess. Makes sense. No need to tell the world, I guess. It's going to be an interesting week. Or year, the professor said. Thanks for the info, Mick, I said. We'll have to do lunch in the faculty club sometime soon. Lunch? Ha, he chuckled. You'll have half the faculty thinking I'm dating some young thing, trading marks for sex or some such thing. Although I would love to talk to you some more. Come by my office sometime and we'll chat. I'll do that, I said. Mick was an old friend, and seemed to be on my side. We parted as he went on to mathematics and I turned into the administration building. Once inside the building, I walked up to the registrar's offices. I was getting pretty good at wearing heels, but only had 2-inch ones on today. I was taller than most with them on as it was. I headed to the head registrar's office, peeking into my own old office as I went through the halls. Ben Swenson was busily working away in my old office at the paperwork I once handled and didn't look up. But it seemed that everyone else was staring at me. I have been getting used to that over that past few months. It seems that I had a look that made people, and especially men, look twice. Or more. Henry Reimer was at his desk when I walked in. He hadn't seen me for the past 2 years, so he can be excused for not recognizing me. May I help you? He asked. It's me, Henry, I said. Janelle, formerly John. McFarlane. Reporting for duty. Oh, John. I mean Janelle. We have been expecting you. He seemed flustered at my appearance. My, but you look so young. And pretty. And, oh my, I'm rattling. I just didn't expect you to look like this. Strike what I just said. I'm trying to remain professional, but... Here, let me introduce you around. Don't worry, Henry. No sexual harassment suits on the first day, I promise, I laughed. This is a bit of a shock to everyone, I guess. Henry took me through the department, where I was introduced to all the senior staff as John, back to work as Janelle, and to younger and newer employees just as Janelle, new girl on the front counter. It was interesting to see how everyone reacted to me. Among the younger ones I was just another pretty young thing in an entry position. But the senior staff had varied reactions from disgust to lust, with Ben Swenson among the latter. Henry showed me to my workstation at the registration counter and introduced me to Kaylee Brown, who was the senior girl on the desk. I remembered Kaylee. She had been one of the last women I had hired before my illness. Naturally, she didn't recognize me, and Henry hadn't told her who I had been. She assumed she would be training me, and was surprised at how much I knew. I worked here before, I admitted. Until a couple years back. All I'm going to need help with is anything that might have changed over the past 2 years. That explains why Mr. Reimer was showing you around, and not Mr. Swenson. Actually, a lot of things have changed since I started. Mr. McFarlane was in charge then, and things were a lot better. Most of the senior girls have quit since then, and things have gone downhill a bit. I had wondered how Kaylee had moved up so fast on the counter. When I had the place, there was seldom more than one new hire a year, and some of the staff had been at the job for 10 or 20 years. Now Kaylee said that fully half the staff would be new this year and only half trained when the big registration rush hits in a few weeks. After talking to Kaylee for about a half hour about the changes, I got a call from Mr. Swenson's secretary, telling me to report to him immediately. "Hello, Ben," I said when I got to the office. "How is the job fitting you?" "Quite well, Miss McFarlane," he said, "and do call me Mr. Swenson, not Ben. We like a bit more formality around here. Things are much more efficient here now. I came up with a 24% efficiency improvement on my first year on the job." "How are things looking this year?" I replied. "I understand there are going to be quite a few new bodies on the counter for registration." "It is normal to see a dip after a peak year," he responded testily. "Don't worry your pretty little head about things like that. Just make sure that the counter works well this fall." I saw the setup immediately. Ben was planning to use me as the excuse when his vaunted numbers didn't measure up this year. Sure, he had managed to improve efficiency in the short term by implementing quotas and turning the department into more of an assembly line process, with no personal interactions allowed between staff, according to what Kaylee said. But over the long term, that wasn't going to work. Most of the experienced staff had transferred to other departments or left the university entirely. Now, with a mostly new staff, production was doomed to plummet. And he was planning to use me as the blame. Well, I wouldn't stand idly by and watch that happen. I noticed that Ben was pretty much talking to my chest as he rhymed off some of the changes he had implemented since my illness. "My face is up here," I finally said. "Oh well," he looked me right in the eye. "It is a very pretty face too, Janelle. I wonder if you would like to have lunch with me today?" I suddenly wished I hadn't promised Henry that there would be no sexual harassment suit. Ben was treading perilously close to one. "A business lunch, Ben?" "Mr. Swenson?" I asked. "Is this a job requirement?" No. No. Just a little personal lunch. A chance for us to get to know each other," he said. "But we have known each other since I hired you 20 years ago," I said. "Surely there is nothing new we need to discuss that can't be said at the office." "Well, that was the old you, and now you are so." He finally realized where he was going, and how deep he was getting into it, and he started to backpedal. "Quite right, Miss McFarlane. No need to get into personal matters, is there? You may go." "Thank you, Mr. Swenson," I said. "And I would prefer if you called me Janelle." "If that is not possible, it is Ms. McFarlane, not Mississippi." "Very well. Janelle," he said coldly. "And be careful out there. I'll be watching your performance closely." With that, I spun on my new heels and walked out of the office, my former office, and headed back to my new station at the counter. It was still 3 weeks before classes started, and it was already getting busy. We should have been able to handle it, but the combination of a completely new staff, except for Kaylee, plus Swenson's insistence that any requests that deviated from the norm be funneled through his office, resulted in lineups. I shuddered to think what would happen in 2 weeks, when there would be 10 times as many people in the lines. We coped, partially through Kaylee and I coaching the new girls on processes and procedures so that Swenson wouldn't have to process them. We actually would have made progress, but the numbers of students coming in was growing at a slightly faster rate than the improvements in our productivity. And I noticed that there was a black hole in Swenson's office, and any applications that were referred to him, as per his insistence, were never seen again. On the Friday, the last day before Hell Week, the week before classes start, I had worked a long shift, having come in at 6 a.m. to get filing done properly before the counters opened at 9 a.m., and had worked through till 3 p.m. with no break other than 15 minutes with one of the girls. I would have liked to have lunch with Kaylee, who I was really starting to like, but we had discovered early that one of us had to be on the counter at all times to help when the new girls had questions. I looked up at the next student in line, and was surprised to see a familiar face. "Hi, Steve," I said brightly. It was the nerdy-looking engineering student I had met at the club 6 weeks earlier. "What can I do for you?" "I just wanted to say hi," he said. "My classes are all booked for this term." "Well, hi," I repeated. "Don't tell me you stood in line for an hour just to say hi to me?" "Well, it was more like an hour and a half," he said with a grin. "I was kinda hoping you might want to go out with me. Either after work tonight, or maybe tomorrow night." "Geesh," I said. "I've been working since 6, and it will be 6 before I'm finished. I'll be too beat to be any kind of company tonight." "What about tomorrow?" he asked hopefully. I really didn't want to go out with the guy. He was nice and all, but I was no more into boys now than I had been when I first met him. But he had such puppy dog eyes as he stood waiting for an answer, and I remembered back to the days when I was the boy asking a girl out, and how much nerve it took to ask, and how rotten I had felt when I was turned down. "Look," I said. "This is a bad time of the year for me, and I certainly can't go out clubbing or anything like that. But if you want, we could do dinner and an early movie. I'll have to be home by 10 though. Next week is going to be hell, and I want to be well rested for it." "Great," he said, with a massive grin on his face that nearly made him look cute. "Where do I pick you up?" I didn't want to give out my address, so I suggested that I would drive. He wrote down his dorm number, and we set 4:30 p.m. as the time I would pick him up. I told him to pick the movie, since I hadn't seen any of the current ones. I think I handled a dozen or so more students before Kaylee came to my station. "I'll take your line for a while, Janelle," she said. "His Highness wants to see you in his office." "What for?" I asked aloud. "I don't know, he seemed ticked off," she said. "But he usually seems ticked off." I headed back to my old office and found Ben working on a few registrations. I was astounded to see how overloaded his in-basket was. There had to be 1,000 applications sitting there. Because Ben was ignoring me while he worked on the form, trying to make me feel unimportant, I was able to get a look at the date on the form. I recognized my new feminine handwriting on it, since it truly did require his approval, unlike most of the others that were mere paper pushing. And it was from at least 3 weeks ago. How could he have gotten so far behind? When I was in that desk, a registration form had to be completed the day it came in, or I stayed at work until they were all done. But Ben Swenson was a big shot boss now, and left at 4 p.m. sharp every night. He finally looked up. "I saw you talking to a student a few minutes ago," he said. "I've been talking to students all day long," I replied. "That's my job." "Your job is to handle registrations." "I understand you were setting up a date," he said. "Yeah, a date with someone other than you," I thought. But he was right. I just wasn't sure how he had learned about it. He must have a spy on the counter, I realized. Probably Dawn, who had been working at the station to the left of mine. She was the least efficient of the counter staff, 25 or so, with breasts nearly as big as mine, and a cute figure. I wondered if Swenson was dating her. It would be like him. I wonder if she knows that Swenson has a wife and 3 kids at home. I made a mental note to mention it to her, casually. I noted that there were no pictures of them on his desk. There always had been when he had been my assistant. Ben chewed me out for longer than the time I had been talking to Steve, finally indicating that he intended to give me a written warning. It was time to play hardball. Okay, Ben. I mean, Mr. Swenson, I said. But if you are that concerned about me taking 5 minutes then to talk to a friend, you must want me to follow all the time rules. I came in at 6 this morning, so I am way past my 7.5-hour shift. I'll be leaving now. Not so fast, he said. I didn't authorize you working early. As far as I know, you came in at 9, so you will work till 4:30. Okay, I countered. But according to the union contract, we are allowed an hour lunch and 2 15-minute breaks per day. I want to serve notice that I will start taking them, and if the other girls see me doing so, they might want to do the same. I hope you have backup staff for the counters to cover all that. What? He nearly screamed. You can't do that. Registration staff have always skipped breaks during the rush period and taken half-hour lunches. Yeah, I said. But they had a boss that would cut them a bit of slack. If you want us to follow the rules in your favor, we are going to follow the ones in our favor. I know what you are doing. You think you can pressure me not to write that letter. Well, it won't work, Missy. I'm going to write it up immediately. Instead of handling all those registrations, I said, pointing to his inbox. That really made his face turn red. You will leave my office now, Miss McFarlane, he yelled. I left the office, and saw that pretty much everyone in the place was looking at me. It seems that they all heard at least Ben's side of the conversation. He had been yelling pretty loudly. I walked over to Kaylee, who was one of those who was staring at me. Come on, I said, putting a little sign on the counter that read closed, use next counter position. We are going on break. Break? Kaylee asked with eyes large. Are you sure? If you want to, I said. I don't want to get you in trouble. Count me in, she said with a grin. I'm dying to hear what went on in there. You probably heard most of it already. Do you mind if we take someone else along? She nodded, so I went to Dawn's workstation. Do you want to take break? I asked her. Break? Do we get a break? 2 a day, I said. 15 minutes. I've got something I want to tell you. The 3 of us headed to the coffee room. As I was pouring coffee for us, I asked Kaylee if she had ever met Swenson's wife. I turned around to see Dawn, with a confused look on her face. Ben isn't married, she said. He told me so. Well, he was 2 years ago when I was last working here, I said. Married with 3 kids. 2 girls and a boy. They'd be 14 and 6, with the boy 9 now, I think. He said he had never been married. He was waiting until he was more established in his career, she said. Her face told me she was starting to see the picture. That rat. Was he dating you? I asked gently. Yes, she said, nearly sobbing. Ever since the interview. I don't think I was going to get the job, so I agreed to go out with him. We stayed the night at a motel. Since then we have gone out twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday. Never to his house, always a motel. And he always sneaks out during the night. Getting back to his wife, no doubt, Kaylee suggested. Probably tells her he is working late. The bastard, Dawn said. But what can I do? I need this job badly. I laughed out loud. Honey, you hold all the cards. It is totally against the rules for a manager to date someone working for him. All you have to do is go see Henry. Mr. Reimer. Tell him what has been happening, and there isn't a chance that you will lose your job. Really? Her face brightened. Then she looked pensive again. You are so nice. Ben said you were awful, and out to get him. He kinda had me spying on you. I'm so sorry. I kinda guessed that, I admitted. But don't worry, you are young, and we all made mistakes at one time. That seemed to confuse her. But I'm 25. You can't be much older than me. Looking at you, I sometimes think you are the age of the students. No, I'm older than Kaylee here, I said. I just look young. I've worked at the university for several years before a medical procedure a while back. Oh, she said. How do you know how old I am? Kaylee asked. I don't think I've ever told you that. Oops. I might have created a problem here. How to get out of it? You're 33, aren't you? I said. I've seen your personnel records. I had access to them in my old job. Yeah, but there is no way you can be over 30, Kaylee said. I'm with Dawn. You don't look a day over 20. If that medical procedure made you so young looking, I want to take it too. Trust me, you don't, I said. But look, our 15 minutes is almost up. We don't want to be late getting back or the hatchet man will have our heads. Sorry, Kaylee. No gossip about the meeting with Ben. Maybe later. It doesn't matter, she said with a laugh. I heard most of it anyway. I think even Mr. Reimer did. You two can go to the counter, Dawn said. I'd like to go talk to Mr. Reimer, if I can. Go for it, girl, Kaylee said. We'll cover for you. It was an hour later that Dawn came out of her meeting with Mr. Reimer, and she had a big grin on her face. She leaned over to me and whispered, I don't know what will happen, but I'm in the clear. Mr. Reimer was very interested in what I had to say, and called in someone from Human Resources to listen to it all. We closed the registration doors at 4 o'clock, and at 4:30 I had a decision to make. There were still 120 or so students in line, and if I left, and all the other girls did, they would have to come back tomorrow after having waited in line for 90 minutes. I didn't have the heart, and we all worked till 5:30 to clear the backlog. I did decide that I wouldn't stay late to do any filing though, and when the last student was gone, I got my purse and headed out the door. Hot date tonight, Kaylee joked as I left. No, not tonight. Tomorrow though. I had to admit I was looking forward to going out again. I realized that it would be my first date without a niece to back me up, and I was kind of anxious about it. I walked through the largely empty office, and as I passed Henry's office, he called me in. Ben, of course, had left an hour ago. Janelle, he said. Come in for a second. Sure, Henry, I replied. What can I do for you? I heard a disagreement you were having with Ben earlier today. Would you like to let me know what happened? I thought for a second, and then sat down and told him the full story. I admitted to making a date on the university's time, and then related all that followed. Yes, that sounds a bit like what I heard, Henry said. Ben dropped off this letter before he left. Would you like to see it? I would, and I did. In it, Ben accused me of just about everything short of stealing petty cash. I was unruly, insubordinate, and undermining his authority by handling student requests that he had specified must come directly to him. I don't believe a word of it, Henry said. Talking to the student is nothing. But there are some severe charges and must be dealt with, particularly where you are not following procedure and handling requests. Come with me, I said, leading Henry to Ben's office, where I pulled a key from my purse and opened the door. You have a key to this office? Henry asked in amazement. Sure, it used to be mine, I said with a smile as I opened the door. No one ever asked for it back. What are you looking for? Henry said. I just wanted to show you this. I pointed to the inbox. There are several hundred unprocessed forms here. If Kaylee and I had been feeding through everything in his rules, this pile would be 3 times as large. Henry had a serious look on his face as he riffled through the pile. Ben has told me that the paperwork is up to date and under control. My God, this one is more than a month old. This student needed an answer to this within a week to apply for a scholarship. This can't be happening. It is, and following Ben's rules just would have made it worse, I said. I like to think that my boss is the student I'm helping at any time, and I need to do anything possible to solve his or her problems. Passing a sheet back into that black hole would not solve anyone's problems. I'm taking these with me, Henry said, picking up the pile of forms. I have some work to do. I locked the door, then handed the key to Henry. He thanked me for my time, and then I left. The next day I did my house cleaning and other chores in the morning, then spent the afternoon getting ready for my date. I started with a bubble bath. It was one of the little treats I liked to enjoy on weekends. It still amazed me to see those big breasts floating in amongst the bubbles. I shaved my legs and my armpits. As a blonde, I don't have to do that chore as often as women with darker hair, but it still needs to be done. I can remember Pearl getting on my case the first time about it, when my legs had started getting quite furry. After the bath I picked out a blue skirt, along with a white cashmere sweater that had a low enough neckline to get Steve's interest up, but not low enough to get his hopes up. I wore 3-inch heels, knowing that Steve was tall enough that I wouldn't tower over him. A few accessories, and then it was time to do my makeup. I was pretty good at the makeup now, after all the lessons my nieces had given me. I wore makeup to work every day, of course, but I knew that a date required just a little more. The lipstick was a shade darker, and the eyeshadow and mascara a bit heavier. I know some women wear little or no mascara to work, but as a blonde I need to work on my eyes so that they just don't completely disappear on me. It was one of the tricks Pearl had taught me. I was ready at 4, and hopped into my car to head over to Steve's dorm. I parked and found the right building, and then headed up to his room. As I did, I noticed that there seemed to be an inordinately large number of boys hanging around, and I could feel all their eyes burning into me. I tried to ignore it, until I came upon at least 24 boys hanging around outside Steve's room. I couldn't even get to the door, with all the boys, who had no compulsion about leering, whistling, and making semi-lewd comments. One of the boys rapped Steve's door, yelling, "Steve, your date is here." Another said, "Man, he wasn't kidding when he said he had a hot date. Hey honey, why are you going out with the nerd boy? Why don't you go out with me instead?" said a muscular-looking fellow. I stopped and looked right at him, and said, "Well, Steve is a lot better looking than you. I guess that's why." All the other boys laughed at him, and he seemed to deflate several degrees. Just then Steve opened the door, and popped out, shouldering his way through the boys. "Gosh guys, why are you bothering Janelle? Find your own girls." "If I could find one like that, I would," another boy said. Steve took my arm and led me away from the crowd, who seemed to follow us part way to the stairs. "Sorry about that," he said. "I swear I didn't tell anyone you were coming, but Bill and Carl, the guys we went to the club with, must have been talking about how pretty you were, and, well, I guess a crowd just grew." "No problem," I said. I realized that Steve's status on campus must have just skyrocketed as he walked through the hallways with me on his arm. Our date was pretty low-key. We went to a chain bar/restaurant and had a nice dinner. I told Steve about my day on Friday, and for a while he seemed upset that he had gotten me into trouble. I assured him that nothing was seriously wrong. Then we talked about him. He explained his plans and dreams, and as I listened I realized that I shouldn't be dating people so young. He was a typical kid, with unrealistic views of the world, and his place in it. He assumed that in 10 years he would be engineering huge skyscrapers. And maybe he would, but something told me he would be more likely designing school additions or highway overpasses. But he was still young and had those stars in his eyes that require a few years of reality to hammer away at. It was fun listening to his dreams, and I had to keep him talking about himself so we wouldn't spend a lot of time on my background. I dislike lying, so it was hard to explain things. I told him where I was born, and where I grew up, without mentioning that I was a boy at the time, and that it was 40 years ago. I told him I had finished college here, and then got a job, without mentioning when. He flat out asked me my age, and I said a woman never tells that, but that I was several years older than him. He had said he was 22. Several can be interpreted widely, I reasoned. He seemed surprised that I didn't have any special dreams or plans for the future. When we got to the theater, it turned out that Steve had chosen a chick flick for us, and was pleasantly surprised when I suggested instead a film based on a comic book hero. I admitted to being bored by chick flicks, and enjoyed a good action picture. It was a good show, and we rated it a 4 stars of 5 on the drive home. At his dorm, we chatted in the car for a half hour, and finally I realized that this part of the date could go forever, so I suggested that I walk him to the dorm entry. Once there, we said goodbye, and I did kiss him. And to my surprise, I did enjoy it. I had been planning a quick peck on the lips to thank him for the date, but somehow my body took over, and we kissed for nearly a minute. When he backed off, I could see that he had an erection, and he was a bit embarrassed about it, and nearly fled from me. But I had the female version of an erection as well, with my nipples tensing up and a certain dampness in my panties. Damn this body, I thought. I had just decided that I don't want to go out with young boys, and then it does this to me. I went home planning to take a cold shower, but once there I got the bubbles out and had a bath that was, well, a lady doesn't speak of such things. Use your imagination. On Monday I was in at work at 6 a.m. again, in spite of what I had told Ben. I didn't plan on taking breaks or a full lunch. When I came in, I saw that Ben's door was open, and peeked in, only to find Henry there, working through that stack of registration forms. "Hi," I said. "Helping Ben out?" "Oh, hi Janelle," he said, then paused. "Well, Ben doesn't work here anymore. He's on paid leave right now, although I expect it to become permanent after we work through all the hoops. I came in early to clean up this mess." "Can I help you with it?" I asked. "No, it's all right," he said, then stopped and thought. "Wait a second, this used to be your job, wasn't it? I keep thinking of John and you as different people. But you know all about this stuff." "Yeah, I do," I said with a smile. "I can probably help a lot." With that we both sat down and started to press through the paperwork. When the counters opened at 9, we had finished half the pile, and were working on the second half when the other girls came in. Henry held a little meeting and told them of Ben's fate, and seemed a bit surprised when small cheers were heard. He then surprised me by telling them that until a new assistant registrar was named, I would be looking after Ben's duties. More cheers. Apparently I had more good friends in this group than I had thought. I worked in the office until 3, when the last of the backlog was over. It took a bit longer, because when one of the girls brought a form into the office, I dealt with it immediately, often authorizing the clerk to use her own initiative if a similar situation arose. The girls were all pleased at being able to help people immediately, instead of having to tell them that they would have to come back later. Especially since it was Hell Week now, and the waits were over 2 hours now. At 3, I came out of the office, intending to take a counter position, but they were all filled. So I went out into the line, and started asking people what they needed. I let the girls know that if they had a problem with a form, to take it to Kaylee, and she would deal with those she could and leave the others for me. While working the counter the last week, I had learned that probably 20% of the students didn't need to be there. They were in the wrong line, or could do what they needed online, or could leave their task until after Hell Week was over. Soon students were dropping out of the line to follow my suggestions, and the line started to move much faster. In fact, when 4 p.m. came and we stopped people from joining the line, it only took another 90 minutes to clear the people who were standing in line. That was less than the last year I had worked before my illness, and less than half of what I had been expecting. After the last student had been served, I gathered the girls around and congratulated them on their work. Other than Kaylee, none had worked Hell Week before, and they had all been super. Even Dawn was putting out at an increased pace. When I dismissed them, Kaylee asked any chance of you getting this job full-time, and almost all the other girls nodded in agreement. I hadn't thought about it, I said. And I won't for at least a week. Right now all we can be concerned about is surviving this week. Well, I hope you do, one girl said. Working here is actually fun without the ogre peering down our necks, or bus lines. There was general laughter. I used to dread work. Absolutely hated it. But now I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Well, I said. It only works like this when we are a team. And I think we make a pretty good team. Now everyone go home and rest up for tomorrow. The next day when I came in at 6, I found that there was far less on my desk than I had expected. Kaylee had been doing a wonderful job in dealing with issues. So once I had finished the unresolved issues, I set to work to rescind many of the negative policies that Ben had implemented over the past year. I couldn't actually authorize anything, but forwarded them all to Henry, who I was certain would approve all of them without question. To my amazement, the girls started coming in early. It started at 7:30 when Kaylee appeared, and by 8:30 everyone was present and we were able to have a little team meeting before the doors opened. I then amazed them all by asking them what they thought we were doing right and what we should try. Everyone was in favor of my floating position. It is no fun to tell someone that they have spent 2 hours standing in the wrong line. And no one told students that they could have accomplished their task in 5 minutes on the computer. Doing so to someone who had spent 2 hours or more in a line would just be cruel. The girls had other little tips and ideas, and when the half-hour meeting ended, everyone felt valued and contributing to the team that was rapidly gelling. That day went amazingly well. I worked the line, and it never grew much more than an hour in length. Students were less frustrated from a long wait, and were less often abusive when they finally got a chance to talk to someone. By the end of the day, we finished the last student at 4:45, a record for Hell Week, when a 5 p.m. finish was considered excellent. The rest of the week went as well, actually better. The girls were gaining confidence, and making more decisions on their own, and this saved time all around. My work on the line kept things short, and Friday, which usually is the worst day of the week, was actually better than Monday had been. Morale among the girls was higher than it had been in years, higher than 2 years ago, when I had last been in charge, I realized. Part of it was that they were coming out of a period with a bad manager, but part of it was that now they considered me to be one of them, and I swear they worked harder for me than they would for anyone else. But the following Wednesday, when Henry called me into his office for a final registration report, I was decided. He told me that Ben's appeals had failed, and he had been dismissed, although with a large enough settlement to annoy me thoroughly. A search for a new assistant registrar was planned for that fall, and Henry urged me to apply. He was crestfallen when I said I wouldn't apply. He was seeing me as a young girl again, and in fact the job he was offering me is one I had done for 20 years. My new experiences developing teamwork were exciting, but in reality the job bored me. I look like I'm under 20, and still will in 5 years when Henry retires. There is small chance of them giving the head registrar position to someone so young looking. And to tell the truth, I really don't want the job, as much as I did 2 years ago. Instead, I asked that Henry look into something for me. In 5 years, my legal age would be 65, and I would be eligible for a full pension. I asked for a settlement that would cash me out now, so I could go back to school. I had planned to spend my retirement painting, a hobby of several years. Now I wanted to go back to college as an undergraduate in fine arts, so I could learn and experiment in the craft. I would look the age of the other co-eds, and when I finished with a master's, hopefully in 5 years, I would be well adjusted in my feminine role. An entire new life would be open to me. 3 weeks later Henry called me in, and let me know what he had gotten for me. It was far better than I dreamt possible. The pension settlement was based on the fact that I could be expected to collect for the next 50 years without a buyout. At an average payout of $40,000 a year, our pensions are indexed, that would total $2 million. That was the buyout. The sweetener was that I would not have to pay tuition, nor dorm fees, so long as I was in school at the university. And they pulled strings to get me into the second term of the course, starting in January. I would have to take summer courses over the next 2 years to make up for the first term courses I missed, but it would get me through university a full year sooner than if I had to wait until the next September. I didn't have to think long on the proposal. I accepted on the spot. I didn't leave my job right away, but even sat, on Henry's insistence, on the committee that chose a new assistant registrar. And I think it was my pressure that got Kaylee the job. I know it had been my pressure to get her to apply for it in the first place. Her winning the job was critical in keeping the team spirit we had developed, and was about the only thing that kept the other girls from resigning en masse when I told them I was leaving. I guess they assumed that if I left Ben, or a Ben clone, would come in. The nice thing was that at 33 Kaylee will be 38 when Henry retires, just about as young a woman as the board would consider for his position. There was no guarantees she will get the job. It will depend on what she does in the interim. But she should have a good chance at it, and I hope she gets it. Me? I'm looking forward to my new career as a co-ed. I wonder who will be my dorm mate.